Okay, sorry about the delay. We finally have our quorum here, and I think we're ready to begin. Thank you, Chair. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Boyd.
Present.
Alderwoman Davis. Alderman Ornowitz. Alderwoman Hubbard. Alderman Kotar.
Here.
Alderwoman Spencer. Alderman Oldenburg.
Here.
Alderwoman Boyd.
Here.
Chairman Roddy.
Present.
5 present, you have quorum.
For the sake of you who haven't been to a HUD's meeting for a while or have never been to one, we've been taking a minute or two at the beginning of each meeting to kind of re-explain why we're here. We've gotten a fair amount of discussion over the last couple of years about the activities of HUD's and what we do down here. And we would like to put that in focus so everybody understands our purpose and the meaning for us being here. Large cities like St. Louis, and St. Louis is probably one of our largest regions' transfers of wealth. We tax people who have resources and we provide services to those who do not. And in order to do that, the way we raise resources is either increasing the tax rate, which we have done considerably over the last 30 or 40 years, or else we increase our tax base. Unfortunately, the history of St. Louis being as it is our tax base has been shrinking, which is why we've had to increase our tax rate. The reason to shrink, any number of them, but perhaps the easiest way for large cities to transfer wealth is taxing businesses to pay for services for residents. For many years, that worked very well in St. Louis for the first 100 or 200 years of our existence. But when you have 4- and 5-story factories that you're taxing, and those factories eventually become obsolete and they move the jobs and the tax revenue to the suburbs, they leave behind vacant fields and vacant buildings and brown fields, and they take the jobs and the revenue with them, and that creates an enormously difficult situation for the city. And the HUD's committee, our job is to begin trying to think about how to grow that tax base. For that purpose, we adopted a kind of a working mission statement. We facilitate the urban development to maintain the economic viability of the city. In other words, we need money, and improve the economic well-being of our residents. And so that's what we're trying to do. We have 3 primary tools of doing that. One of them is the block grant money, and this is actually from the block grant, which is administered by HUD. This is actually from their website. They like to use block grant money to ensure the decent, affordable housing to provide services to the most vulnerable in our community and to create jobs through expansion and retention of business. And additionally, we go ahead and we try to create reasons why someone would want to locate in the city, and that is a result of planning. And we use planning and zoning to optimize our development opportunities that can be derived from our unique transportation, location, institution, and other community attributes that are our competitive advantage. And then finally, we use federal, state, and local economic incentives and programs to adjust the inefficiencies and the weakness in our tax to service model. So when we go ahead and we're doing tax breaks for businesses, the idea is to grow ahead and grow our tax base. And today we're going to see a couple examples of how we're trying to do that. One of them, or in both cases, we're taking a look, we're using 2 of those tools. We're using our planning and our zoning, the location of the facilities, the historic institutions that are located here to create a unique value proposition, and then of course we're adjusting our pricing and service model through the use of TIF or tax abatement. So that is kind of what we're doing. Sometimes we forget why we're doing that. This is actually to grow the tax base in the city so that we can go ahead and provide services. We spent the last 3 or 4 years to try to understand how to do that better. We've hired a number of people and we have formalized that process considerably. We are now hoping over the next year or 2 to begin applying those, what we've learned from that with more purpose and focus those resources on implementing an economic development plan that we expect to have done here shortly. And now as we begin to have, I think, spent the last several years addressing the viability issues, we're this fall gonna, we've already started, but this fall we'll be getting hot and heavy into trying to understand what we're doing in affordable housing. Almost all the studies indicate that perhaps the best measure of really changing people's lives is having a stable home environment or housing environment. And we are, as a region and as a city, spending considerable resources in that area already. However, I think we could coordinate better those resources and make them more purposeful. And our goal will be to better tell our story. So that's kind of where we're going. We spent the last couple of years understanding tax base, and hopefully the next couple of years on trying to focus on the well-being of our residents. So sorry for the long preamble, and apologize if I sound a little pedantic up here, but we have run into situations where we've had people, I think, lose sight of what our purpose is when we're down here at the HUD's committee. So with that, we'll go ahead. We've called the meeting to order. First will be excused alder people. We have several who have contacted us who said they were unable to make it, including Alderman Ornowitz and Alderwoman Davis. I'm not sure if anyone else has contacted us. And Alderwoman Spencer has joined us since we did roll call. We'll do approval of minutes at this point. If there's a motion for that, or if anybody needs a minute to take a look at the minutes.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes. Madam Clerk, call the roll.
Alderman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderwoman Davis. Alderman Ornowitz. Alderwoman Hubbard. Alderman Kotar.
Aye.
Alderwoman Spencer.
Aye.
Alderman Oldenburg.
Aye.
Alderwoman Boyd.
Aye.
And Chairman Roddy.
Aye.
6 aye votes.
Generally, we take up the bills of the alder people that are not present, and that are not on the committee, excuse me, and that would mean that Alderwoman Gracia's bill would come up first. However, she is not available today to be before us, so she has asked Alderman Oldenburg to handle her legislation. But since he is on the committee, we can hold off on that, and I'm going to go ahead and pull some chairman discretion, and I'm going to put the my piece of legislation up first, then, which is Board Bill number 59, because we have a couple folks down here on that, which is the Cortex legislation. So why don't we just... Dennis, or Mike, did you want to go ahead and just step up? And I think we have a slideshow for us to walk through this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me? Is this on? Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I did put a booklet next at each place, so it's the same as the slides that are up here. Might be a little challenging to crank the head and view that there, but it's these slides, and so I'll go through them with you. Appreciate the opportunity to appear before you this morning, and what we are asking for is that you would approve Board Bill 59CS, which amends and increases the current RPA. Thank you. And so let's see here. All right. Yeah. Might be better to pull it forward. Yeah. And turn it a little bit. Yeah. Push that one in. Yeah. There you go. That's about as good as we'll do. Thank you. But these slides you have before you in the booklet. So we're asking this morning for an amendment and an increase to the current RPA 5B note, TIF note, that we hold, Cortex holds. And as you can see from the bullet points on this requested action, the $2 million TIF note supports a Phase 1 garage, and the additional $5.2 million will support the Phase 2 garage. It's about 1,000 spaces, and both garages are owned and operated by Cortex and will remain with Cortex and will be available for not only district employees, but visitors and also metro station parking. So if you turn, yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, that would be a good idea. Will it advance? Okay, now let's go to the next one. So just,
I'm sorry, Dennis, they've asked for the record, we need your name and your...
oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Dennis Lauer, L-O-W-E-R. I'm the president and CEO of Cortex. So the next slide shows the RPA areas that were approved back in 2013. Just to refresh your mind, there are 11 of these, and we activate each one when we have major projects. We're not asking for any activations today. But the ones that are checked on this map are the ones that thus far have been activated. On the next slide, it just gives you a little bit of metrics associated with each of those RPA areas. Again, the checks with the RPA area that are already activated. The allocation that was approved back in 2013 for each of the RPA areas, and that totals in the blue area down below $167.7 million. And of that $167.7 million, up to $67 million can be used for area-wide improvements. So whenever we do area-wide improvements, it will reduce the amount in one of the RPA areas because the total can never exceed $167.7 million for the entire project, life of the project. So the next to the last column there is the amount that has been committed and used to date, and by RPA area. And that RPA 5 that's in red going across, that's the one we're talking about today. So the total amount that has been used to date, committed to date, is $80.4 million associated with private development and $25 million associated with area-wide public improvements for a total of $105.4 million. So that means that there's 62, just skipping across the bottom line to what remains, $62.3 million remaining, and this last column shows where those allocations remain at this point. So today we're asking that you approve the remaining $5.2 million in RPA 5. $7 million has already been committed for projects. So the remaining $5.2 million for this Phase 2 garage expansion. And again, it's a piece of public infrastructure that we will own. So turning to the next page, this is just a timeline of Cortex buildings. So I wanted to show the progression. We start back with the Center for Emerging Technologies all the way back in 1998. And CET was the first statewide technology incubator, and it remains very vital today. And then it expanded in 2004, the old Doris Carr building, and those two are joined and are operating today. And it was a graduate that came out of the CET2 building that became the anchor tenant for Cortex and the start of Cortex. And the Cortex 1 building was built to accommodate that tenant, Stereotaxis. West End Lofts came along in 2008, right across the street from the Doris building. And then the DuPont building also was built and opened in 2008. Next slide shows that in 2012 then was the next building, and that's the At 4240 building. That was a historic rehab. About a $75 million rehab. And then in 2013, BJC at the Commons was built. Also in 2013, Cofactor Genomics, a spin-out company from the university. And then in 2015, Shriners Hospital was built, and IKEA also was built. And these are the dates that it was open. So it was under construction usually about 18 months to 2 years prior to these dates. And then the next slide, in 2016, Gerhard Lofts was built, renovated, historic renovation. The 4260 building, which Cortex owns and operates and is at full occupancy, that's the building that Vicia is in, if any of you have been to Vicia, the restaurant. And on the top 2 floors is a research organization. And then in 2016 also, the FDA moved into Cortex at 645 Newstead and redeveloped that building. And then in 2016, we opened the Cortex Commons. In 2018, we cut the ribbon in July about this time last year for the metro station, the new metro station. And then the last page in the chronology here, the 4220 Duncan building that was opened in April of 18, just over a year ago, and that's fully occupied. Also in 2018, 4480 Clayton was opened, and that's fully occupied with its IT operation. And then our Cortex Phase 1 garage was just opened in May, and that has 680 cars. And the 4340 Duncan building is about to open. That's a historic rehab, the old Post-Dispatch building. And the Aloft Hotel, which is under construction and will open in the spring, next spring. So that just gives a bit of a chronology of the buildings that have come along in the last 20 years. So the build-out projections are shown on the next page. We project a total of $4 million. We're about halfway there. You can see about 2 million square feet. Construction cost of $675, and that really is just the core construction cost. The fit-out is higher with each of the tenants. It's not included in this. Permanent jobs are about halfway to our goal, about 6,000 permanent jobs now. And I would say that of those permanent jobs, probably 4,000 are new. Others have been relocated and backfilled where they came from. Annual payroll is around $450 million, and right now the latest census is 419 companies within the district. So the next page, we're really very pleased with, and I believe that you will be too. So this is, we just have completed an impact study. And this shows the first 5 years of the TIF program from 2014 to the end of 2018. And it shows the cumulative amount over those 5 years. And so let me just, and for all the taxing jurisdictions, state and then city and all the other city taxing jurisdictions. So cumulatively, $61.5 million of revenue has been generated. The base that's included in that was $20 million. And so the net new tax revenues over the last 5 years that have been generated from the Cortex projects is almost 40.7 million. And you can see the breakdown by taxing jurisdiction there. So about half of that goes to the state of Missouri, and the other half remains here in the city and supports these components, community components as well. So about $9 million has gone to the city, and this is above the base that was there before. And city schools have gotten about $7 million above the base that was there before. And then you can see the other balance reading down. Next slide. Our little bit of our inclusion metrics on the next 2 slides. So first, our construction inclusion performance. You see the goals there of enterprise businesses, MBEs and WBEs. You see the hours to date and estimated payroll related to the workforce for minority women, city residents, and apprentices. Those are the goals. And then you see the cumulative metrics on 36 Cortex projects below. So we've done quite well with the contracts. We've done well in the workforce, minority and women. City residents and apprentices we've always struggled with. Some we exceed the 20% goal. Most of the time it's under the 20% goal, but this is the weighted average of what we've achieved over those 36 projects. Okay. The next slide shows additional direct Cortex projects, inclusion projects. And I'm not going to go over all of these, but you can see that we've been quite involved with the Construction Loan Fund. We also have Entrepreneur Boot Camp, Square One and Square One Ignite. And about 55% of those first-time entrepreneurs, we put 70 through the system every year. About 55% are women, about 40 to 45% are people of color, and of the people of color, about 35%, 30 to 35% are African American. We started a new innovation center called Ed Hub, and it's focused on improving underperforming schools in the neighborhoods in North and some in South St. Louis. We also were a co-sponsor of the St. Louis Public Magnet School, the Collegiate School for Medicine and Bioscience. We also stood up Innovation Hall as a meeting space, and we have a civic lounge that's free and open to the public. It's like an alternative place to come in and do co-working, to like a Starbucks, you know. And then we just opened in the last 6 months the Made and Magic House Makerspace on Del Mar, across from Third Degree Glass Factory. Cortex's contribution to that was about $1.5 million, and $500,000 has gone into scholarship programs for Magic House, and those are available for city residents who are on free lunches, qualify for free lunches in the public school system, and it's great. It's ages 8 to 13. And those summer camps have already begun. Launch Code, we sponsored a new cohort that just was launched in April, and there are 120 in that cohort. We targeted neighborhoods with higher populations of minorities and people of color, and happy to say that we have about 48% are people of color, and about 30 to 35% are African American at this point. And that's a 20-week boot camp, and then there will be placements and apprenticeships. And Cortex is seeking to mentor those apprentices and place them in Cortex-related jobs, and also at the universities.
By point of clarity, that's computer jobs. So
Computer jobs, yes, yes, that's correct, yes. Coding. We have a standing inclusion committee of the board. It's very active, and they do past program audits and current program audits, and also past building audits and current building audits to try, and we look at things through an equity lens to try to improve accessibility for all people. All the staff now have been through anti-racism, anti-bias workshops, some of us several times, and a number of our board have been through the same 2.5-day workshops, and we now are workshopping the remainder of the board. And then the bottom two are programs that we are participating in. One is national, one is regional. One sponsored by J.P. Morgan, and we're working with Propeller out of New Orleans and there are 4 cities in the country that are working on entrepreneurship and minority entrepreneurship, and we're one of them. And then the Kauffman-funded Regional Equity and Entrepreneurship Collective. We are part with our other entrepreneur service organizations in the region to create better wayfinding for minorities and women into the technology ecosystem, and also supporting them, finding ways to support them better. So now just to focus on the ask today, what this will be used for. The next slide shows the 4210 building and location of the 4210 building and the new Phase 2 garage. And it's the Phase 2 garage that supports the employees in the new 4210 building that's about to be built, as well as Metro and other visitors coming into the district. So that's what we're talking about, and that map shows you where it is next to the grain silos. Next slide is actually a detail of what those 2 projects are. So let me just lead you through those. 4210, we're very excited about this. This will be the largest tech building built in the district thus far. It's 325,000 gross square feet, a combined 5-story and 8-story building, multi-tenant creative office and lab. And it's being developed by Wexford Science and Technology out of Baltimore, who has developed a number of our projects and owns and operates them. Total cost of that project is $115 million, approximately 800 construction jobs and 900 permanent new jobs. We think it'll be more like 1,000 or 1,100, but or 900 permanent jobs. We think it'll be about 1,000 to 1,100, but we want to be conservative in those projections. So this is to start in September of this year and opening in the summer of 2021, and no TIF is being given to that project at all, to that private developer. So the Phase 2 garage expansion, as I said, will support that as well as other uses in the district. It's 920 spaces. It connects immediately to the Phase 1 garage, and combined it's about 1,600 spaces for the district. We are the owners of both garages. The total cost on the second garage is $29 million, and the total combined cost for the garage and development are $144 million. So the $5.2 million of TIF that will be added to the 5B note, RPA 5B note, will increase it from 2 to 7.2 million, and that $5 million, though, is only 3.6% of the total combined development cost. And now just some slides about what that building looks like. So this is going to be an iconic building for St. Louis. It's going to make a statement, and we, in the potential tenants that we have talked with about this, they're very excited about this building. They feel that it reflects their technology-related image, and a lot of early interest in this at this point. So it actually looks like it's one building, but it looks like two buildings. It's kind of the Pac-Man building. So these colors are a little off, and we're still the developer is still playing with the colors, but the idea is to try to pick up some of the Missouri history of the cliffs and along the riverway. So river tones are being used in these for the skin. So just paging through it, you can see it from the side, the north facade there as well. It will have street front retail all along it, down Duncan. And then from the northwest corner and going back behind it, the garages are on the right. You just keep going. The garages are on the right of this slide. You're looking at the Phase 1 garage, which is now complete and open, and the Phase 2 garage will just be connected on the other side of that. And this concourse that goes down the middle will be an outdoor area for events and sitting and meeting. And you see it continues down toward the grain silos where it steps down. We have about a 14 to 15 foot grade drop from the top of Duncan down to Sarah. And so taking advantage of that, you can see by putting seating areas down the front of that. So the garage is the next, in the last few slides. It shows the Phase 2 garage. So we built Phase 1, and Phase 2 is what we are seeking the amendment of the existing Phase 1 note, so that the combined note will be $7.2 million for those two buildings. And you see a Phase 3, so that's going to be a podium garage for the third and final building on this parking area, on this parcel. The next, go to the next slide, please. So the next slide shows this a little bit from above and looks down. Again, Phase 1 is done. The red Phase 2 is what we're now focused on advancing together with the new 4210 building that you see in front of it. And you see that shadow building that's just to the left of Phase 2. That will be the footprint for a new building, probably 100 to 150,000 square feet will be the final building. We don't have a client or a tenant for that yet, but that sequentially will be the next one built there. And then finally, last slide, it just shows it from the other side, from south looking north. So last slide, back to the requested action. We are requesting that you approve Board Bill 59CS that amends and increases the current 5B note from $2 million to $7.2 to allow us to build that Phase 2 and bring it up to a total of 1,600 parking spaces. And both of these garages will be owned by Cortex and operated by Cortex. So that's my presentation.
Thank you, Dennis. Is John Ferry here? John, did you, the area-wide TIFs are always a little more complicated to figure out. John has spent quite a bit of time last week to make sure that we understand everything that's going on. I didn't know how far or what you've done yet, John, on this, or,
So Alderman Roddy, just to clarify, this is not an area-wide, it's not coming out of the area-wide bucket, it's the remainder that's in that RPA 5.
I'm sorry,
Yep.
my terminology with this stuff tends to be a little lax sometimes. I guess what I'm saying is a TIF district is a little different different than our typical site-specific TIF to analyze, but Jonathan has spent quite a bit of time the last couple days trying to make sure that we understand it from the city's perspective. Jonathan, why don't you kind of walk us through, or I don't...
Sure.
We kind of talked yesterday. I wasn't sure what kind of presentation you were going to give us today, but I wanted to make sure that everybody understood that you had been looking at it.
Yeah, so as Alderman Roddy mentioned, the majority of the time I've been spending on analysis has been doing sort of a analysis of the entire TIF area of all the different RPAs, doing a cash flow analysis, but that's not really what's before you guys today. If you would like me to speak to that, I can. But what I've just handed out is the analysis on just this piece of the project. It's just my typical scorecard. So just going, down the line here by the numbers, the 10-year revenue to the city, I estimated about $12.3 million. Of that, about $5.6 million that would be coming out of this TIF note would be city revenue. We don't have a substitution effect, but I assume that 15% of the jobs would be relocating from somewhere else in the city. That's caught in, that's accounted for in that baseline revenue number. So it's about $875,000. So you can see that the net new revenue to the city is just under $5.8 million over 10 years. Net new revenue to the school district is just over $6 million. Over 30 years, this project would generate about $42.4 million. We would expect that based on the sort of the economic strength of this property and what's around it, basically the rest of Cortex essentially would generate about $28.2 million based on our estimates. So you can tell that this is obviously much higher density. It's going to be generating at an even higher level than what the rest of Cortex is. Compared to the rest of the city, a site this size would generate just shy of $6 million on average over 30 years. So this property is performing at about 7 times the average commercial property in the city. So as a result, as you can imagine, that's a positive return on investment. The model scores at 4.25 out of 5. The reason for that is that the reason it's not 5 out of 5 is because this area has a very high bar it has to meet. And it does meet that bar, I would say, with flying colors. So I think SLDC recommends this project, and if you have any questions, I can try and answer those.
Is Tom right? Did the comptroller respond at all? Have we heard from the comptroller at all?
I believe that I've been told that Rob Droney, on behalf of the comptroller and on this particular property, did review and is supportive. I think everybody who has touched this has seen the benefit and the what has been generated here at Cortex, and so we're very supportive of approval of this particular.
If we could at least try to get an email from whoever the comptroller's representative is by, Friday.
Do you have something in writing from us?
I'm trying to get something E&A did recommend approval also.
Yes, so it has been approved by E&A.
E&A, and I presume the comptroller voted for it at that.
Yes.
Okay. Good enough then. If that concludes the presentation, we'll open it up to the committee for questions. Alderman Boyd, do you have any questions?
Sure. Jonathan, right now we're just looking at RPA 5, which has no retail sales, correct?
Correct.
And with the current projects that have been completed.
I'm just looking at this property. RPA 5 includes the 4220, right? Doesn't
Yeah,
it?
it does.
Which has the chocolate pig in
Chocolate pig
it?
is there, and then this will have in the first.
Dennis, you can
Yeah.
come on up.
Yeah, the 4220 building is in RPA 5. It has the chocolate pig there, which is a restaurant. And then this building, 4210, will have a number of retail components on the first floor.
Okay, do we have any idea of what type of retail sales expectations?
We're expecting that there will be an additional restaurant, so it will be our fourth full-service restaurant, and we are expecting a dry cleaner. We are expecting possibly a children's daycare. That's being looked into at this point. So it's services to support. There have been discussions with a bank, possibly having a bank presence there as well for depositors. So it's that kind of service retail that supports the companies.
But the service retail doesn't really generate sales tax, though, do it?
The retail does, but the service, no. It just would add number of employees, that sort of thing, and services to support them, yeah.
But have you calculated an estimate of the retail sales tax dollars for this particular project?
Have you included that?
So I don't have retail sales in these numbers here because I don't think they were included in the PGAV numbers, were they? I don't think they were. But what I can tell you is I don't know how big the restaurant would be, but I'm going by memory here. But I think a conservative estimate would be for a sit-down restaurant would be about, I want to say $250 in sales per square foot a year.
About 5,000 square feet.
So it'd be about 5,000 square feet. So I mean, roughly, just to the city's general fund, the 2.625% rate, that would be about $33,000 a year in sales taxes.
Okay, but you didn't include any of that in your formula matrix?
No. No, it's not included in here.
Is that because that 30-something thousand is kind of minimum, kind of?
Well, yeah, it is minimal, but it's also, I don't think it was included in the numbers I got from PGAV. So I think they just modeled out the payroll and the parking.
What do you have on payroll?
It was 443 jobs, and I want to say it was 13 million? Mike, does that sound right? Yeah, I think it was about 13 million a year.
And we get half of that.
We would get 1.5% of 13 million. Because 1%
Well, it
earnings
says
and
in
0.5%.
here, the TIF captures for 50%.
Oh, right. Yeah, so we get 1.5%, and then we get half of that. So basically, 0.75% of that payroll.
Okay. I don't have any more questions for you, Jonathan, but I would say to Dennis that I'm impressed with the additional Cortex inclusion efforts. That's pretty impressive. I am interested in the Delmore Boulevard Maid and Magic House Makerspace Scholarship Program. Is this information on your website? Is there some, how do we find out more information about some of these inclusion efforts?
We'll send it right to you directly, to the members of this committee.
You can send it to the chairperson, that's fine.
Okay, we'll do that. So with respect to the Magic House, this is their first permanent city location. We're excited about that. It's about 7,000 square feet on the second floor, And then the children also get to use some of the equipment on the first floor that's in the general makerspace. So it's summer camps, and it's also Saturday camps during the year and on vacations. And so it's really targeted for city kids between 6 to 13.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you very much. No further questions.
I had the opportunity or privilege to go out for the opening, and I think there's a little, it's worth everybody's time to go over there and understand. It's north of Delmar, so symbolically, I think it's very important. The makerspace was originally within Cortex, and it was run by a large national company that had financial problems, quite frankly, and it was a St. Louis philanthropist, the owner of Third Degree Glass Company, who was one of the founders of Square, who kind of endowed that and made that much of that building possible. So I think it's a really great story, and it demonstrates how when things start happening, good things happen. They have a way of spreading throughout the whole community. Alderman Kotar.
No questions.
Alderwoman Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions I wanted to follow up on. The makerspace sounds like a really neat space, as do some of the co-working spaces. Does Cortex currently do anything to support that sort of activity, recruitment, and amenities to the public outside of the Central Corridor?
So with the Square One program, which is at CET, the Center for Emerging Technologies, which also has co-working space in it, we do outreach into all of the communities. We actually go into the community and recruit for those programs. And so there are usually 30 to 35 first-time entrepreneurs in the 10-week boot camp in the fall. And then we have 2 mini boot camps, 4 weeks each in the spring. And there's about 15 to 20 in each of those. So it's a total of about 70 first-time entrepreneurs. And I had mentioned before what the metrics are in terms of women and minorities on that. But also we give co-working space, free co-working space in the CET building for those folks that want it, that are part of the entrepreneurs. 6 months for free co-working space. And then in the 4220 building is where we have Innovation Hall, and we call it the Civic Lounge, and that's always free and open. But we also, with Ed Hub, we just stood up, we have 6 to 10 fellows. We just had 10 fellows in the first class, 6 months, and they have free space in CIC in the 4220 building. And those are what we call intrapreneurs, not entrepreneurs, external, but intrapreneurs, because they're all working in schools today. Some are teachers, some are administrators, some are teachers that have new technology ideas and they're trying to develop them. And we surround them with mentorship and business savvy as well.
That sounds great. I'm sure there are many of us who would love to help you recruit and make sure that we can help get the word out. What I was looking for more was infrastructure. It sounds like the $1.5 million is going in to help build the makerspace, and I was curious if there was grants available or if there was support issued to physical space construction spaces outside of the Central Quarter, so those who could sort of incubate some of that activity in the neighborhoods in which many of our residents live.
Yep. So let me just talk about the MADE space. So MADE stands for Makers, Artists, Designers, and Engineers. And as Alderman Roddy indicated, you may have heard the name Tech Shop. That was the company, national company that went bankrupt. Fortunately, when I structured that deal, I bought the equipment. It was about a little over $1 million of equipment, and I leased it to them. And over a 10-year period, if they were operating, they would get it depreciated, they get it free. They only lasted 2 years. Mm-hmm. So I had the equipment. It did not go into the bankruptcy estate. And then Jim McKelvey was the one that stepped up And he bought the building on Del Mar, and he put the renovation money into it. I dropped the $1 million of equipment in, and then the other $500,000 we put into the Magic House for the scholarship program for their operations, and they've also matched that as well for the scholarships. In the MAID space, there also is co-working space for those that are members of MAID, where they can sit. Probably 20 or 30 computers that are there, and they can design stuff, and that's on location. We don't have a co-working space in other neighborhoods at this point. It's something that we have had conversations with CIC about, because they're the ones that provide the co-working and shared office space. And I know that they're looking at that possibly at the Del Mar Divine as a possibility.
I'd like to encourage you to consider supporting some of the existing co-working and collaborative spaces throughout the city, some of which struggled financially, obviously, with models that have heavy support otherwise. And those are good breeding grounds, really, to try to find people that are interested in entrepreneurship and other things. And they're often located within communities that are struggling, and those that have people kind of surrounding them that are coming and going, and they're good hubs. So I'd like to express to you that I hope that you could consider expanding your footprint and your reach through physical spaces outside of the Central Quarter, not just recruiting people from the community to come to the Central Quarter, but maybe meeting people where they exist, where they are.
That's a very good suggestion, and it's very appropriate for the time, because the board is now set up a special strategic planning committee to look at locations outside of Cortex. I will bring that idea back. I think it has a great deal of merit. The only thing that I would add, though, Alderwoman, is that it's interesting because we've had discussions about, is it better to be in the small communities, or is it better to bring those people into where all the other resources are? And there's a difference of opinion even within the community. Some people say, I want to be at the table where their decisions are made, and then others are saying, no, I want you to come to us. So, but I think it's a great idea, and it's an appropriate time for us to examine that.
I think there's merit to both, and I think there's space for you to exist in both ways. So if there's anything I can do to help with that, I would love to help you develop a presence in neighborhoods outside of the Central Corridor and kind of strengthen the connection to the communities outside of that area.
Great suggestion.
My last question is regarding the amount of earnings tax that we're able to generate here at this site. It's really impressive, the number of businesses we have here, and the economic activity that we have in Cortex. It certainly is a bright spot in our city. It says here that we are generating $450 million of payroll. I want to make sure that we have the earnings tax applied to all that, and what measures we're taking to make sure that all folks associated with this project that does enjoy some significant subsidy from St. Louis City taxpayers, that those who are enjoying that are paying their fair share into that pool.
Absolutely, and I can tell you that they are all paying earnings taxes. Of that 6,000 number that you see there, about 4,000 are new, either new from within the city and been hired onto those jobs, or coming in from outside. We've had a great deal in the last, I'll say, 2 to 3 years. The larger corporations are now moving footprints into the city for the first time. When I came in 2010, it was ironic because it was always told to me that it's the earning tax is the reason why they weren't coming into the city. That was the first 2 years. Once we established the value proposition for Cortex, since 2012 or 13, that question has never been asked of me, either by a startup or now established companies. And we have all of our regional fortune companies now have a presence in Cortex. We have many more that are about to move in from outside, from the East Coast that are coming in, related to the NGA. Nobody raises the issue of the wage tax. Nobody anymore.
And so by that you mean that it is not a deciding factor?
Correct. And I was very quick to shut down in the early years, when, first 2 years when I was here, when people were complaining about the 1.5%. And I said, I'm sorry, I have no sympathy. I lived in Philadelphia for 12 years. I paid 5.25% wage tax. And so, the challenge that we have, is that traditionally our suburban municipalities don't really value and embrace the city. They do so more on an a la carte basis, as you know. But I think we have overcome that now with Cortex, because what we offer in Cortex for these corporations is something they can get no place else. They can't get it in the county. The only place they can get it is in the city at this point.
Well, thank you for that. And I appreciate you taking time to answer my questions. And Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions today on this matter.
Thank you, Alderwoman. Alderman Oldenburg.
No questions, other than to congratulate Dennis and Cortex on everything that they've done thus far.
Alderwoman Boyd.
Yes, sir, Mr. Dennis. Thank you very much. This is very impressive. Ironically, I used to work over at the rehab center when it first opened. So you're in a great spot. It's a real good area. But I wanted to ask the question about the workforce inclusion, and then your goal was 20%, and you came up to 15. So how do you see participation, and what are your roadblocks?
So let's go to that chart. It's on slide 11. The challenge with city residents and construction is twofold. And we beat up our contractors all the time, and they're actually pretty good. And they obviously have to, we're union within the district, and they obviously have to go to the unions, and they have to pull people off the benches. There are two challenges. One challenge is that there's a lot of construction going on right now, and so the minority construction workforce is really spread thin. The second is that, we've seen out-migration from neighborhoods, minority neighborhoods out to the county. A lot of these minority workers are still working. That's why you see the 25% overall. We still are meeting that goal, but the difference is that at least 10% of those people are outside in the county, living in the county. So we're seeing out-migration of a number of construction workers into surrounding municipalities, but we are still meeting the 25% goal, but it reduces the amount. Those two things reduce the amount for city workers.
Okay.
Yep.
And then on the inclusion efforts, on the Venture Cafe, how would we get, because I see you focus on magnet schools, but how do you all reach out to the other schools? How are they knowledgeable to know of this going on?
Yeah, so the Collegiate School for Medicine and Bioscience does, it's in the city, it's down in the SLU Medical Campus. 88% of our students are from the city, and 50% are minority. And it's about a school of only 275 next year will be the enrollment. And I chair the advisory board of that, so we really push to ensure that we keep our numbers up, both with city residents and also with minority participation and students. That's the only high school or the only school engagement we have directly, but the Ed Hub Education Innovation Center was stood up specifically to be able to work with teachers in schools in North and certain parts of South St. Louis, where there's challenges and metrics. We see a lot of trauma in those schools. They're an attempt to try to support those children. And the first group of 10 fellows just completed. We mentored them for 6 months, and they're taking new curriculum and new ideas back into those schools to improve outcomes.
Okay.
We are following them and measuring what the outcomes will be, and we're in the process of recruiting a new cohort. Now that touches 6 to 8 schools, that are where there are teachers already embedded there and they're the issues and problems. Those are the two efforts that we have right now around middle and high school.
So does the superintendent give you the schools, or how do you all pick the schools?
So the way that EdHub recruits those fellows is that the fellows apply, and then they have to have the permission from the principal of that school, not the superintendent, but the principal. The superintendent is very supportive of this program. And then we have quarterly meetings of EdHub where we have 200 to 300 educators that come in to Cortex. Day-long events. Microsoft sponsored the last one. They brought in people from the West Coast who are in the education sector and consulted with the teachers that were there to help them, give them ideas for improving delivery of curriculum.
Okay.
So those happen 4 times a year, but the fellows are ongoing all the time.
Okay.
And then I should say the other thing is that we have a lot of school retreats that are held in Innovation Hall through EdHub that are one school bringing in their teachers for a day or a Saturday or something like that.
So you're going to send all this information
Yes,
to the church?
I will.
Okay, and then
Absolutely.
I can look it over. Thank you so much.
We'll do a narrative about that as well as the other programs that are here.
Okay, thank you.
One of the programs that isn't on here is Venture Cafe, which meets every Thursday, and there are between 400 to 600 or 700 people that show up every Thursday. And we have 12 to 14 educational breakout sessions. And we always ensure that the presenters of those, that we usually have about 50 to 60% women presenters, and we have usually about 45 to 50% of the presenters are people of color. Because we feel that unless people are in the front of the room that look like you, you feel like this stuff is out of reach. So we have very intentional efforts for those educational breakout sessions. And I'll provide those metrics as well.
Yeah, that's real interesting because the schools in my area, I would really like them to participate in it, and so that's why I was asking.
And I can connect you up to the executive director of EdHub as well.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That's all the questions I have.
Okay, if there are no other questions, the chair will entertain a motion that we pass out of committee Board Bill number 59. Excuse me, we did not. We have a committee substitute before us. So I guess I'll ask and the explanation of the committee substitute was the Cortex was actually asking for us to do a couple things, including expanding the area-wide TIF. What we wanted to do are the area-wide allocation terminology. We wanted to kind of break that up into 2 pieces, and that's why I had Jonathan taking a closer look at it. So we're doing, that'll probably come back in the fall, I'm guessing, or some other time when we have a little more time. This is relatively urgent, so I'll probably be seeking to suspend the rules. But the thought was that we would go ahead and do the first piece today and the second piece later on. The piece today is what's necessary in order to get the new building started, which is all set to go. And matter of fact, if we don't do this, it's going to create some problems. So we have a committee substitute that effectively does that. So what we, in essence, discussed today was the committee substitute. So I apologize for not properly having that before us. So at this point, I would entertain a motion that we put before us committee substitute for Board Bill number 59.
Move that we put committee substitute for the Board Bill 59 before us.
Second.
Been moved and seconded by the Alderman from the 22nd.
7.
Oh, 27th? Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderwoman Davis. Alderman Ornowitz. Alderwoman Hubbard. Alderman Kotar.
Aye.
Alderwoman Spencer.
Aye.
Alderman Oldenburg.
Aye.
Alderwoman Boyd.
Aye.
Chairman Roddy.
Aye.
6 aye votes.
Okay. By that, we have committee substitute for Board Bill number 59 properly before us. The chair at this point will entertain a motion that we pass out Board Bill number 59 committee substitute with a due pass recommendation.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved by the Alderman from the
Previous
22nd.
roll.
Seconded by the Alderman from the 7th. There's a request for previous roll. Hearing no objection, we'll consider Board Bill number 59, committee substitute, pass out of committee with a due pass recommendation. Thank you all for coming down today and joining us. Next up, we'll pick up Alderman Oldenburg's legislation, Board Bill number 48.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Board Bill number 48 is being introduced to you, hopefully with a due pass recommendation and your favorable consideration. This is pretty easy. This is a cleanup. If you recall, we passed small wireless and wireless facility legislation last session, which codified Ordinance 70942. This board bill is a cleanup to that. And if you recall, the wireless facilities legislation we passed last session was really to come into compliance with state law, the Missouri state statute law that was passed, and it really impacted the city of St. Louis in terms of its regulation of wireless facilities, really in two main areas, the building code and the zoning code. So two separate bills were introduced to track the compliance of the state law. And in doing so, the text changes we made to the zoning code were fine until Amendment 2 recently passed last November by the voters of Missouri. If you recall, Amendment 2 is the medical marijuana, which allows the legalization of medical marijuana in the state of Missouri. Where the conflict comes in is on page 3 of 5 on line 3. As a result of the medical marijuana bill that we passed vis-a-vis Amendment 2, we had to change the law here that said, if you look at line 3 on page 3, it says any wireless facility is the change as opposed to any use prohibited by federal law. So by federal law being the key phrase there to pay attention to. Because Amendment 2 passed, in theory, by having that text in there that said any use prohibited by federal law, the concern here would be that medical marijuana would then be prohibited in the areas where this zoning code was intended to have the most impact, which was around really to protect NGA. NGA, for security purposes, wanted to make sure that wireless facilities weren't anywhere near, or certain wireless facilities weren't anywhere near that facility. So at the end of the day, this is really all about pot, and as a quick clarification, just to the zoning code, the text here. I'll entertain any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Alderman Boyd has to step out for another meeting. Alderman Kodar, any questions?
No questions.
Alderwoman Spencer, any questions?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Alderwoman Boyd, any questions?
No questions.
Okay, hearing no questions, the chair will entertain a motion that we pass out of committee with a due pass recommendation.
So moved.
Second.
Previous roll.
Hearing no objection to the previous roll, we'll consider Board Bill number 48 passed out of committee.
Alderman Boyd's not here, so I don't think we can do previous roll. Can? Yeah, we can. You're right. You're right. Absolutely. My apologies.
Hearing no objection, we'll consider Board Bill number 48 passed out of committee with a due pass recommendation. Okay, next on the agenda is Board Bill number 58. In Alderwoman Ingracia's absence, the Alderwoman from the 20th is handling this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Board Bill 58, which I will be handling for the Alderwoman from the 6th, is essentially an agreement to conduct a significant amount of infrastructure improvement to our interstate Highway 64 at the Jefferson interchange. This is a really large project. The total amount will be $30 million. I understood it to be closer to $50 million, but I'm going to let SLDC speak on that. The vast majority is being funded outside of city taxpayer dollars. We have some CMAQ and STPS funds going into this, and you can see those mapped out here on the map that we've just handed out. By and large, this is a project that city taxpayers are putting little into compared to what we're getting out of it, by way of those matches with the STPS and CMAQ funding. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our folks at SLDC to describe the project in more detail.
Thank you, Alderwoman. Members of the board, Mr. Chairman, this is furtherance of support for development of the NGA site. Originally, we promised that we would improve the infrastructure. This is one component of it, and as a result of this effort, we have generated a number of city-wide, particularly in this area and going north, improvements to infrastructure, and we have more planned. As the Alderwoman indicated, these are services to the NGA site, and a couple of points here is that what we are doing here is reconnecting the city grid. So if you look at the map, the first slide that you have there, the blue streets that you see there are essentially the subject of this board bill, which is the $30 million that BPS will be managing. So this is reconnecting the city grid, if you will. You can see that Clark Street is actually coming in, connecting over to 20th. You see the improvements that are also made there. The yellow there that sticks out is a track, a bicycle facility. And the sort of pink chartreuse is the work that MoDOT will be doing. And so if you go to the second slide for me, Lori, this is the breakout. So for this particular project, what we have is a city streets component, which is $17.5 million. I mentioned that it was 30, but it's 17.5. And then there's the MoDOT piece, which is actually constructing a full interchange here at I-64. And so these are the additional dollars that are being brought to the table. The STPS dollars and CMAQ, as well as monies that are coming from the NGA budget, which is a combination of city and state funds. As you know, the state, the way that pot is made up, 1/5 of the money is actually from the city, and 4/5 from the state. So the predominance of this is state money coming in. So I believe, in summary, that this is a tremendous benefit to the city and the outcomes there. So what we're trying to do here through this ordinance is to give BPS the authorization to be able to manage this project on our behalf. So LCRA will be the finance manager. BPS will, in fact, manage the project and bring it to conclusion, design and construction. I have Brenner Brown here from BPS who can speak to the technical pieces of this, but essentially this is something that I think you all do all the time, which is provide BPS with the authority to move ahead with the project.
Just out of, I guess this was signed to our committee because what, LCRA is the...
I don't know, maybe it's because NGA has been basically through HUDs, and maybe this is just a continuation of it. I don't know.
Where did the city money come from then?
It is if you recall that the city provides up to $1.5 million on an annual basis from the earnings tax from the NGA employees that are currently there. If you're currently employed at the NGA site. So if you recall also that the state then provides the way I break it out is for every dollar, 20 cents comes from the city, and 80 cents come from the state.
So this is from from their,
This is
from
coming, this
the
is coming
payroll
from,
taxes that we're
this is
collecting.
coming from the payroll taxes and the withholding taxes that's that component.
Okay.
And these funds were provided through, that is the stream of revenue that services the bond debt that the LCRA is committed to.
Alderman Kotar, any questions?
No questions.
Alderman Oldenburg, any questions?
Questions.
Alderman Boyd, any questions? Okay, if there are no other questions, the chair will entertain a motion that we pass out of committee Board Bill number 58 with a due pass recommendation.
So moved.
Been moved by the alderman from the 7th, seconded by the alderwoman from the 27th. There's a request for previous roll. Hearing no objections, we'll consider Board Bill number 58 passed out of committee with a due pass recommendation. Next up is Alderwoman Gracia's resolution. That will be handled by the alderman from the 16th, Alderman Oldenburg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. At the request of Alderwoman from the 6th Ward, I'm introducing Resolution 78. Last Friday at the board, we suspended the rules to introduce this. The Alderwoman asked me, because I had been in some conversations, and she's asked for some of my advice as well as conversations regarding this board bill and this project, which I think is a very good project. This is, again, Resolution 78 is asking for 75% of 10-year tax abatement at the 401 South 18th Street. So this is the building that is right adjacent to 18th Street and I think Highway 40. Sort of the closest intersection that you can think of. This is going to be the new home, potentially, of Build-A-Bear for their corporate offices, as well as a retail facility that hopefully will work in concert with the events that are happening and the traffic that will be happening with the Union Station, with the aquarium, and with the redevelopment plans that are coming to fruition there. These are county jobs that will be moving from Overland, Missouri, the municipality of Overland, to the city of St. Louis. It is about a $6.5 million, $6.7 million project build-out, and they're asking for, again, 10 years, 75% of abatement on the real estate. 3.5 floors will be occupied by Build-A-Bear, and I think the remaining 10 that might be there will occupy the balance of the building. We have SLDC was put together. Obviously, the analysis that I think you're familiar with, it scores 4 out of 5. It is a net present value of $289,000 over the term of the 10-year lease. So not a huge significant incentive. I think it's less than 5%, right? Yeah, less than 5% of the total build out here in the way of a tax abatement incentive for what is really a St. Louis regional company. I will entertain any questions. SLDC is here, as well as representatives from Build-A-Bear are also here to ask, to entertain probably any questions you may have.
Jonathan, did you just want to walk us through your numbers real quick, Jonathan?
Well, one thing that might clarify is I said it's about a $6.5 million project use, but then the construction costs here are $3 million. So I don't know where your 6.7 use or what the discrepancy might be there. That might be the first clarification.
Yeah, the discrepancy on that, I believe, has to do with the difference between everything that is property owner is putting into the building versus what Build-A-Bear is putting into the building, I think is the discrepancy there. So the 6.75 includes everything, and I think the 3 is just,
There are specific improvements.
yeah, I believe that's what it is. But yeah, Alderman Oldenburg just covered it fairly well, but I can go over the numbers with you real quick. Yeah, it's about $3 million in gross revenue to the city. The combination of the property tax abatement and the earnings tax rebate over 10 years, the city portion of that will be about 1.3 million. It'll take, I think, a little bit more than 10 years for them to get the full 1.5 million on the earnings tax rebate. So it's structured a little bit differently than like a TIF would be, for example. A TIF would just be 50% of the earnings tax per year for 23 years or whatever. This one is 50% of the earnings tax until it hits a cap of 1.5 million. So, and that's a nominal amount, it's not a present value amount, so. I think the reason why it's less than 1.5 there is because that's net present value too. So the present value to the city is about 1.3 million of that earnings tax rebate. So the net revenue to the city is just under 1.7 million. Baseline revenue from this property currently is about 127,000. So it's over 1.5 million new revenue to the city just in the first 10 years. And then of course, after the first 10 years, the earnings tax will be paid in full. So that number will go up fairly significantly. The typical property in this area of this size would be generating about $9.7 million. The typical commercial property just anywhere in the city would be about $1.9 million, and this property will generate about 11.3. So it's a positive return to the city compared to, its comparable counterparts. Because of these numbers, it gets a 4 out of 5 on the score, and I can answer any questions if you have any.
Yeah, I guess for edification for everybody, this is a little different in that there's a, we're handling, I guess, this resolution is for tax abatement for the real estate taxes, and I guess the earnings tax rebate program, I guess that's the proper, me and my terminology, that's going to be handled by the Ways and Means?
Correct. Yeah, so that's a good distinction I probably should have mentioned, and Jonathan was discussing it. His analysis included the entire incentive package. It is broken between 2 committees, so in addition to the 75% at 10 years tax abatement that is before this committee, there is a 50% earnings tax rebate on the employees that will also be there, and that is over the life of the lease, term of the lease, which is 10 years.
I think it's probably noteworthy to bring that up just because
Certainly.
This is probably more, this is a unique situation. It's probably more aggressive than what we would do with that building. How old is that building anyway that they're going into?
About 30 years old.
About 30 years old, so it's probably coming off of, I don't know what the abatement was,
Yeah.
but it's certainly a unusual situation, and in this case, I think SLDC, not speaking for them, felt that the fact that we're recruiting a headquarters from St. Louis County merited, I guess, a little extra consideration. So I just want to, I think we need to be upfront with everybody about that and
Certainly.
make sure that it's part of the record here as we go forward.
Yeah, and I mean, and on that, I know that Alderwoman Ingrassia has reached out to members of the Ways and Means Committee, knowing that earnings tax rebates are sensitive. But as you can see from the dynamic scoring that Jonathan did here, it really is to the extent that no employees are in that building now, and if over 200 folks from the county come, and only about 30 of those employees are city residents, we're capturing 170 employees' earnings tax that we normally wouldn't have. So we're getting 50% of 170 employees tax that we wouldn't normally have as a result of that. So I think I would like to publicly compliment SLDC on running through that analysis and coming up with what I think is a very fair and compromised incentive that will be heard by Ways and Means, but worth noting that it is a companion bill associated with the entire incentive package with the tax abatement that's just before this committee.
Okay, any questions? Alderman Kotar.
No questions.
Alderwoman Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So can you help me understand what's happening there now that generates just $127,000 for the city currently?
That would be the combination of property taxes, and I believe I put a base amount in because of the 30 employees that are city residents. So technically, that earnings tax is already being captured.
Got it.
By
And
the
you're
city.
saying that the economic activity of moving the headquarters down here would generate 1.7 million in a direct benefit to the city?
Correct.
Does that include the $1.5 million in earnings tax that we're rebating back?
Right, because it's just under 3 million that it would generate, and then we're rebating back about 1.3 over 10 years. So it'd be about 1.7 over 10 years net.
Oh, I'm just confused. So the 1.7 is the rebate back, not the total economic activity generated?
No, the
the site.
1.3 is the rebated back, and the 1.7 is the retained amount. So the reason why it's different is because as I mentioned, it's not just 50% of like per year. Every year it's 50% until you hit the cap of 1.5 million, and it's a nominal cap, not a present value cap. So so basically, the city benefits by the time value of money on this. So the net present value of the incentive ends up being a little bit less than the 1.5 million.
And then, so as the property taxes are not abated on this then, and they will be paying property taxes on the property?
They will be paying 25% of the property taxes. 75% would be abated.
The landlord will receive the abatement.
Yep.
And that's a separate bill that we'll consider?
No, that, it'll accrete to the tenant, the job creator here vis-à-vis the lease. So
I
to-
understand, but the
right.
tax abatement will be a separate, is that a separate piece of
That's
this?
what's before you right now. The tax abatement is the
So
resolution.
both pieces are here
No,
before us?
the only thing before you is the tax abatement piece via Resolution 78.
Okay, and-
The earnings tax will go through Ways and Means tomorrow and
Got
be
it.
heard.
I apologize, I missed that. So, Mr. Chairman, there were some emails going back and forth on the committee on this matter. Has all of that been resolved?
Right. What the issue was, we had not had the resolution at our committee hearing last week. We have to advertise for this resolution. It's as part of our notification requirements. And so the resolution was advertised to be heard at our meeting last week. However, the resolution had not been introduced, so we had a hearing. We said board bill, but actually it was a resolution. We had a hearing last week for a resolution that had not even been introduced, but it had been advertised, and it's my understanding that that complies with our requirements for notification. So there was some criticism that I, as chair, and SLDC received because we were having, and probably rightfully so to some extent, a mystery, resolution. We had we had nothing to talk about now, but the fact that we had that hearing and the fact that we came back today fulfilled that requirement. However, there was some criticism of that, not only from the general public, but from the sponsor. If we had not had that hearing last week, this resolution, the deal would have been dead until the fall. And I have been explained that if we didn't get this done before we went out, that it wouldn't get done. So we needed to have the hearing last week in order to have it, yet we were getting criticized for doing it by the sponsor of the resolution, and all we were trying to do was keep the thing alive so that she would have the option to introduce the resolution at a later date, which she subsequently did. And so that's why we had all the emails going by. We confirmed that she, in fact, did want to have it heard today. I did receive an email from her saying that she would like it to have heard today, and I think that's been confirmed by the alderman from the 16th that she wanted it heard. So she had been complaining that we had a hearing on a board bill that she didn't introduce. I'm sorry, it gets kind of confusing, but I think it's all been worked out, bottom line.
Okay, so all of the issues addressed, mentioned in the email exchanges have been addressed, and there has been an explanation provided by SLDC for some of the mishaps or misunderstandings as requested by the chairman in that email? We don't need to discuss them necessarily here, but if that could be provided to the rest of the committee that was on the chain, I think it would be helpful.
Well, I'd love to just clear the air. I don't think that from our viewpoint, there are no mishaps. We basically were doing our job in the sense that we essentially announced and what do we call it? Noticed appropriately in order to keep the bill such that we could get to this point today, we needed to do the things that were done. So, we, I believe, have been working with the Alderwoman and will continue to work with the Alderwoman to make this all happen. And so we're working with her to do what's appropriate and also respond to whatever her requests are.
I appreciate the explanation. I have no further questions.
Okay. Alderwoman Boyd, any questions?
No question.
Hearing no other questions, the chair will entertain a motion that we pass out of committee resolution number 78.
I move that we pass Resolution 78 with a due pass recommendation.
Second.
Previous roll.
Been moved second, request for previous roll. Hearing no objection, we'll consider resolution number 78 passed out of committee with due pass recommendation. I believe that concludes today's business. Thank you all for your patience. Meeting adjourned.
Right at noon. What's that? I'm going to be getting there right at noon.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Joe,